Stanton Moore. How you doing?
I'm doing great, my man. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I know I said it before we got started, but thank you a million times over for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I'm glad to do it. I know we've been trying to connect for a little while, so it's really great to finally connect and get to talk to you for a little bit.
Well, we are here. We are doing it now. Where are you coming to us from?
From my house in New Orleans.
Okay. So what time is it there? Wait, is it Eastern time?
It's Central Time.
Central time.
So
What is that,
it's
an
one
hour off?
hour earlier. Yeah, 1 hour earlier than you.
Gotcha. I'm look, I've only actually been to New Orleans once, so I'm incredibly jealous. I live in New York, so it's like I think of New York as like probably like the two epicenters I think for art really on the East Coast are like New York and New Orleans. Those are the places that like I think of. But man, I'm so jealous. New Orleans is just the hippest place. I got to go there when I was a little kid, and I remember I was walking down. There's some street where a kid should not be walking. I think it was Bourbon Street.
Yeah.
Yes, and I remember there was just like, tell me if I'm crazy. This might be a figment. There was necklaces with phallic symbols on them, Stanton.
Sure.
Which
Oh, yeah.
I was a strange occurrence. I was very, very young. But I guess Bourbon Street, that's just kind of the vibe, right?
Yeah. And, Bourbon Street has become a tourist destination now, but coming up in the 40s, 50s, all the way up into the 60s, there was a lot of music happening on Bourbon Street.
Mhm.
And if you talk to Shannon Powell, he lived just outside of the French Quarter. So every day as a kid, he was all over the French Quarter. And he talks about all the incredible music and incredible musicians that he got to hear on Bourbon Street. And then over the years, it's kind of catered more and more to selling things like drinks and, Mardi Gras beads with phallic symbols on them. So over time, it's kind of transitioned away from what was a hub of music and culture, and then now it's catering to tourists and trying to make money.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit not as it was, but listening to Shannon talk about it, and for those of the viewers who don't know who Shannon Powell is, he's one of my favorite drummers in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most musical, swinging drummers I've ever heard. And he was really fortunate to grow up in a time where he got to see all of that as a young kid. He talks about being 8 years old, running up and down Bourbon Street all day and all night long, sitting in and learning from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to learn as much as I can from Shannon.
Yeah, we have a couple places like that in the city. Like I guess I'd say like maybe like McDougal Street and which is right. I always flip them in my head, but McDougal Street where like the Comedy Cellar is and stuff like that. I mean, I've only been here about 6 years, but I'll say like after COVID, it's kind of that area gotten a little more touristy. Like I'm not a big fan of McDougal Street. But like there's some cool spots, but yeah, like after a while, it was just like maybe like 3 or 4 years in, I'd say right after about the pandemic hit, it was just kind of got, I don't know, a little sketchier, not as nice. And there was just basically like a million tourists everywhere. It was a little bit like that before, but it kind of, I'd say the last couple of years has gotten like that. And the West Village too, in some sense. But so like, there's all these places in New Orleans that like people know about. You know what I mean? Like Preservation Hall. Everyone knows Preservation Hall. In terms of food, there's like, Dookie Chases and all the like iconic New Orleans stuff. But if you had to like plan someone's night and you're saying like, I want to go get food, I want to go get drinks, and I want to go see music after, as someone who's lived in New Orleans their whole life, where are you going to send somebody?
Well, that's a great question. And I can speak very easily from current life experience. So I'll just use a real life occurrence. where I'm really good friends with Victor Salazar.
Hmm.
And for the viewers who are not aware of Vic, he had Vic's Drum Shop in Chicago, and now he does a lot of drum teching, and he drum techs for Jimmy Chamberlin of the Smashing Pumpkins. So Victor had never been to New Orleans, so they were coming with the Smashing Pumpkins, and they had a night off the night before. So I hadn't met Jimmy in person yet. So Victor and Jimmy came to the house. So I opened my door, and there's Jimmy Chamberlin, who I've been a fan of for a long time. And so he's on my porch, bring him in the house, introduce him to my wife. And Jimmy's just the most lovely, awesome dude. And so I had planned our evening. So, and Victor hadn't been in New Orleans, and I had never met Jimmy. So we go and we have dinner at one of our favorite places, which is a Chafalaya,
Hmm.
which is a very New Orleans spot. And we sat outside, and that was amazing, awesome. And then we go and we hear Shannon Powell at Preservation Hall. So Shannon, who I was just talking about.
Yeah.
We sat next to Shannon Powell's drum set, and we watched him for a set. It was incredible. And Jimmy was just like the whole time just kept looking over at me like, oh my God, like this is so musical, so swinging, so happening. And then we went over to the Maple Leaf to see Johnny Vodakovich.
Hmm.
And then after that, Jimmy went back, and then Victor and I went and had a nightcap at the St. Vincent Hotel, which is an amazing hotel, very cool spot. And we had, killer cocktails there. And so that's just, one evening. But there are tons of other places that I love to tell people, to come check out. And I even have a list, like an 8-page Word doc of my favorite things. And I've got to clean it up a little bit, but I'll offer it to you to put up for your viewers,
Oh, I would
because
love that.
I'm gonna make it available as a download. So I'm gonna do that and put that up. I just gotta clean it up and update it just a hair. But when I get it updated, I'll give that to you so you can share it with your viewers. But it's an 8-page document of just some of the things that we love to do. But some of my other music clubs that I love are, I mentioned the Maple Leaf because we went there, Preservation Hall, DBA is great. And then, my band mates and I in Galactic, we actually purchased Tipitinas in 2018. And Tips is one of the most iconic New Orleans venues
Yeah.
that opened in 1977. So that's quite an honor and quite a journey, taking on one of the most iconic music venues in New Orleans and, dare I say, in the country. Because all of our New Orleans heroes played there, starting with Professor Longhair, James Booker, the Neville Brothers, the Meters, Dr. John, Alan Toussaint. The list goes on and on and on. And then also, Tips was one of the places, it holds about 800 people. So it was one of the places that a lot of rock bands would play their first time through New Orleans.
Mm.
So bands like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Rage Against the Machine,
Ooh.
all played there. And so, I was there to see Pearl Jam when they played, and Bad Brains and Fishbone. So it's a very diverse kind of different types of music that have played Tips over the years. So we can have rock bands, but then you can also, over COVID we started doing seated shows,
Hmm.
and we had Preservation Hall come and play now a couple of times, and we'll do seated shows with Press Hall, Nicholas Payton, all kinds of different. I've played there with my trio, with my piano trio, with tables and chairs and cocktail service. and then you can blow it out and have killer rock bands there as well. And tomorrow night we're gonna have the Wood Brothers with Chris Wood, who I love from Medeski Martin Wood. He was on my second record with me, so I'm gonna go see them tomorrow night.
Now,
So
is that normal for the Preservation Hall band to play outside of Press Hall?
not in New Orleans,
I was gonna say
not in
that
New Orleans,
seems.
and we've been planning on it for years, or talking about it for years, and so we finally have been doing it, and it's awesome. But they do tour. There's a Preservation Hall touring band, and they play all kinds of places, all kinds of festivals. But in New Orleans, they usually always play Preservation Hall.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're getting them over at Tips occasionally, which is amazing.
So was Tips up for sale when you guys went to go buy it, or did you just think about it and just make an offer that the current owners really could
No,
refuse?
it wasn't up for sale, and we wound up doing a festival with the previous owner.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we were doing that, we had a lot of meetings, and our manager would come fly into town, and the previous owner, Roland von Kernatowski, would sometimes pick up our manager from the airport, sometimes drop him off at the airport. And our manager just started saying, like getting out of the car and like hanging up, from phone calls, hey, if you ever think about selling Tips, let us know. And he wasn't really a music guy. And so we had played 6 to 8 times a year for 20 years by the time that we bought it.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came time, he started thinking about selling it. And then we were pretty much the only band he really knew about. And we had been telling him, when you're ready to sell, let us know. So eventually he let us know he was ready to sell. And in long story short, it took us about 2 years to negotiate. He started off wanting to sell us like 49%. And eventually it got to where he wanted to sell the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we own the business, the building, and the brand.
Was there any like nervousness in the sense that you have been saying, whenever it's available, we want to buy it, and then it finally comes to fruition, and it's like, oh, we have to do this now? Was there any like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have been so forward about it?
Yeah, I mean, maybe for some of the guys, but for me, I grew up here in New Orleans, and Tipitina's is, as Ivan Neville likes to say, who Ivan's one of my good friends. He says, Tipitina's, the best way to describe Tipitina's is it's the Madison Square Garden of New Orleans. So growing up in New Orleans, I aspired to play there and then aspired to headline there. And after headlining, twice during Jazz Fest, twice during Mardi Gras, New Year's Eve, Halloween, and several other, holidays throughout the year, doing that for 20 years, we as a band started to joke, well, when we owned Tipitina's. So, it was a very gradual thing, but then you start to like think it, believe it, and then you're like, well, I guess it's possible. And I mean, somebody has to take care of it. We don't think of ourselves as owning it as much as we think of being the current caretakers of our favorite venue and a lot of other people's favorite venues. So I get more people coming up to me now, like on the street or at shows, saying, oh my God, can I give you a hug? Thank you for taking care of Tipitina's. Thank you for saving Tipitina's. Thank you for prolonging, our favorite place. Because anybody who's been in New Orleans usually comes to Tipitina's, and it quickly becomes one of your favorite places. So I get more of that now than, oh my goodness, that was a great show. Or, oh my goodness, I love the new record you just put out. So, because, only so many people are going to like your record, but so many people, Tipitina's can host so many different kinds of music,
Mm-hmm.
as we just discussed. So you got people who come there for the rock, or people who come there for Preservation Hall, or people who come there. Now we're doing comedy shows too. So the there's only so many people in the world who like funk music. So
The
you
cool
got,
people.
what's
The
that?
cool people. It's the cool people
Yeah,
of the
of
world.
course. But you over the course of time, you got people who love, you know, all kinds of different music, and then those people come up and say, "Man, thank you for what y'all are doing at Tips."
Hmm. Now, so you said you bought it in 2018. So then you have 2 years of just normal operation, and then boom, the pandemic hits. How'd you guys adjust to having to? I know you said you did the cocktail hours, but how long of a period were you guys like totally shut down? And then what was? How are you guys scrambling to be able to? Because that's not easy. I know like a million places in New York, like restaurants. One of the most famous barbershops in New York City went under for a minute during the pandemic. So like
Yeah,
that's not a just a feat to breeze by.
yeah, no, I'm not gonna lie, that was the scariest thing I've ever been through. Buying it was fine, and then so here's the thing: is that we we closed on it November 30th of 2018. So at the end of 18, 2030th, I mean, November 30th, 2018. And then at the time, I got married October 13th of 2018.
Hmm.
So I was planning a wedding and negotiating the close of Tipitinas at the same time. So to say that it was a stressful time in my life is is an understatement. And then um in in 2019, we had a great year, but then March 14th of 2020, so that's pretty close to the beginning of 2020. So we didn't even really get a full year and a half. March 14th, we had to close the doors, and that was the day we were supposed to leave for the West Coast portion of our 25-year anniversary tour.
That is horrendous. That is
So we had to
just
cancel our tour, the second half of our tour, and close the doors to Tips. And that was like the scariest stuff I've ever been through.
I can't even imagine. So was it like March 14th everything shuts down? How long before you know you're all back together talking like, okay, what's our game plan for this?
Man, I mean, probably, I mean, it was like a year, but this is the thing is that we kept doing what we could as we could.
Hmm.
So we did sidewalk shows starting with two people, like starting with a, a keyboard player and a guitar player playing Beatles tunes, and we did like a Bloody Mary bar
Hmm.
where we would sell Bloody Marys out of the window, so we didn't have, minimizing contact. And then those grew to trios and then full bands on the sidewalk. And before you know it, we had like 300 people outside,
Hmm.
and we're selling drinks out of the window. And then we started Tipitina's TV, and we would do live streams from inside the club with a 6-person camera crew.
Were you
So we did
already
a bunch of that.
were you already set up before the pandemic happened? Were you already set up in a sense to do live streams?
We did have some cameras, and we were doing some stuff with nugs.net, but we elevated that during COVID and brought in a more robust crew with a jib, a camera on a crane and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So we did a lot of that, and then we also, did some really cool like 5-band, 5-location stream for New Year's Eve, right?
Hmm.
We also did an online streaming benefit called Save Tips, and where we showed some vintage stuff. So stuff like Dr. John on the stage at Tips, Willie Nelson on the stage at Tips, all kinds of stuff.
Had that material been digitized before, or is that just all sitting like in storage?
Some of it was not digitized. Some of it came from like, radio stations that had filmed it, or we really called in a lot of favors and really sourced a lot of this material and pulled it together. And so we did what we could as we could.
Hmm.
And then I think the community and the public really appreciated that and really supported us. And then now a lot of people are coming to the shows and they see that we've put in a new PA. We've, spruced it up a little bit, but we're trying to keep it just as funky, a little more functional,
Hmm.
and a little less gross. But everybody that comes in is like, oh my God, I love what y'all are doing. It's like we can tell y'all care. So more and more people are coming. We're getting more and more national acts. So it's doing well. But through that pandemic, I can't remember a time where it was like, okay, here we go. It was like, oh my God, we can have 50 people now inside. So let's do tables and chairs and cocktail service.
Hmm.
Now we can have 75 people. But it was never like an opening of the floodgates. It was like, okay, we can play on the stage and we can have 300 people. We can sell 300 tickets standing, and it's
Hmm.
an 800 person place. And then they would lift the restrictions a little bit. It's like, oh, we can let in 500 people now.
Hmm.
And then we would like, maybe announce that we could have a couple more people. But it was never like, I don't remember being like, okay, all of a sudden from zero to now we can have 800 people.
Hmm.
It was so gradual, you know,
Yeah, I
from sidewalk shows to the cocktail seating, seated shows inside to 300 people standing, 500 people standing, and then eventually it was like, okay, I guess we can let in 800.
yeah. In New York, there's a very similar vibe with all the venues. I did a couple gigs over the pandemic. Do you know the Bitter End in the East Village or
Yeah.
Greenwich Village? I did a couple shows at the Bitter End, and it was weird. All throughout college, I used to go to the Bitter End every Monday because they do the Monday Night Jam with Richie Kanata from Billy Joel's band, and it was always packed. And then the pandemic happened, and for like the first time in 20 years, this like historic jam session didn't happen for. I don't think they did any version of it for a year, which was insane because I remember going to this every single week. And then I think like the end of 2020 going into 2021, I did a couple gigs there, and it was like you had to book your seats ahead of time, and it was like I can't even remember. It was like a fifth of the full amount of people that were allowed in, and they used to put us on the stage. We instead of like sitting in a normal band position, we'd have to go one next to each other, which I always thought was weird because I was like, we all came here together, so I don't know why they're trying to
Right.
keep us apart. And then I was playing with my good friend Augie Bello. He's a tenor saxophone player, and he plays at like 1,000 decibels. So I'm like, I'm more worried about everyone else. He's blowing his spit on everybody.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it was weird, and now it's finally like I'd say like maybe let's see, what are we now? We're in November. I'd say like the end of 2021, a little over a year ago, it started to get back to that normal feeling. Are you guys one like in terms of how much business you're doing? Are you back on that level that you were in 2019?
Yeah. And we may be doing better now than we were because, as I said, people appreciated how hard we worked and how hard we were trying to give something to the community to
Yeah.
do. The sidewalk shows, the streams, and then so that has just been kind of a groundswell of support. And then the word is getting out to some of the agents, some of the booking agents that we care. And so some of the national acts want to come play tips,
Hmm.
you know? So we're getting more national acts, which means those are more sold out shows. So I'm not sure where we're at in comparison to 2019, but soon we'll be doing the year end financials and we'll be able to know. But one of the things that I said while we're in the middle of everything is, I'm hoping that in 2 to 5 years, we'll be able to say that we're in a better position if COVID hadn't happened
Hmm.
2 to 5 years down the road. So that's kind of the silver lining. And I'm seeing that, definitely with the club, musically, like with my online stuff, I got to really focus on that. I rebuilt my whole team, rebuilt my website.
Hmm.
in 2020. So I'm benefiting from that a great deal. So that's a silver lining. I wrote a lot and filmed a lot of lessons through all that. So, the drum academy is much stronger than it was. So that's all good stuff. And now, man, my 2023 is going to be nuts. Like whenever you want to transition, we can start talking about music. uh, Transition from being a venue owner to start talking about playing music.
Yeah, I was actually gonna go back because I wanted to get into how you became a musician. So when you were a kid, what was your family situation like? Were your parents musicians at all?
Well, my dad had played trumpet in high school, but by the time I was born, I didn't ever see him play music at all, instruments at all, right?
Hmm.
But he loved music. So it was the 1970s. I was born in 1972. So he got into the whole stereo, tube amplifiers and tube components. And so, he put together this whole elaborate stereo system
Hmm.
and loved to listen to music at home. And so, especially during Mardi Gras season, we'd be listening to a lot of the Mardi Gras tunes, which were Professor Longhair, Dr. John, the Wild Magnolia Indians, the Meters. So I was hearing all that as a kid. And then my mom loved Mardi Gras, so she would bring me to the parades. And by the age of like 3 or 4, I started really getting impacted by the the music and the drum lines coming down the street. So the drums really, really excited me. I would go home, hit on the table with knives and forks, and ask for a drum set, ask for a drum. Long story short, they let me start taking piano lessons when I was about 8, and then they let me join the band, school band, and get a snare drum when I was maybe 10 or 11.
Hmm.
And I think I got my first drum set when I was about 12.
Now, when you were listening to all this music, were you trying to trace it back to like its roots and learning all the history of it, or were you just feeling it and that's how you learned it?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I was just feeling it, and just I was into classic rock in high school, and then some punk rock. I was going to punk rock shows and skating
Hmm.
in high school, and
You were a
then
skateboarder?
yeah,
Were you good?
I was okay. I mean, I got to where I could ollie over a trash can,
Oh, hell yeah.
but laying down. Uh, a trash can on its side, not up.
That's
But
more than I could do.
yeah, but I was okay. But I broke my left leg in between 8th grade and 9th grade, and then broke my right leg in between 9th and 10th grade. I was like, man, enough of this. I'm going to focus on drums. So I started focusing on drumming, and then started taking lessons with Marty Hurley in 10th grade, and then wanted to get really serious. And then told him I wanted to be the captain of the drum line, win all state. And at that time, I'd been a little bit of a class clown, really. Like, I wasn't working hard yet, and I got busted throwing drumsticks against the wall with my buddy Kyle Malawson, who's a great rock drummer,
Hmm?
who still is a great drummer. He's the drummer for the Imagination Movers, among other things. And so we got busted throwing sticks against the wall, and I had to write 100 lines. I will not throw sticks against the wall. And I was like, man, enough of this. I need to get to work. And so I started taking lessons from Marty Hurley. And excuse me, Steve.
God bless you.
And I accomplished all those goals. I became his drum captain. I won all state and got a scholarship to Loyola. Started studying with Johnny Vodakovich. So I started getting really serious, like, sophomore, junior year of high school, and then into college. And then in college, I started gigging a lot.
Hmm. So were you
Getting,
as soon as you started getting serious, that was basically just like I'm just gonna be a drummer. No other there wasn't any other thought, like any just like it was just immediately just like this is what I'm gonna do.
yeah, absolutely. And I think I knew that that I wanted to be a professional drummer when I was 12-ish, somewhere in between, 10, 11, 12, something like that.
Hmm.
And it's funny. I think I was like looking at magazines and looking at MTV, and it's like this seems this seems great. I get to play the drums, get to hit stuff with sticks for a living. Seems like you don't have to wake up early. You know,
Hmm.
little did I know how many early flights I'd have to be taking. But so I just decided at a young age, yeah, this is, that's the career for me. And
Gotcha.
then and then I realized it was going to take a lot of work. But then I said, well, let me just start putting in the work.
So
And I started,
was there ever a time where you started having second thoughts about pursuing it?
I guess I had second thoughts about trying to pursue jazz, for lack of a better word, when I was in college. And, I just had some setbacks where I didn't win some of the auditions I wanted to win and didn't get some of the things I wanted. But then that just made me work harder.
Hmm.
And then I eventually did win those auditions. I mean, get placed in those combos and all that kind of stuff that I wanted to get in. So, but if I ever did get discouraged, it was very brief.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Loyola in New Orleans because Johnny Vodakovich was teaching there, and I really wanted to study with him.
Hmm.
And I really wanted. I knew by the time I was ending high school that the music that moved me the most was music from New Orleans.
Hmm.
The Meters, you know. I mean, the Meters are like my favorite band. So I was like, man, I want to. And I had at that time befriended and was drum teching for Russell Baptiste,
Hmm.
who was playing drums for the Meters
Yeah.
at the time. So I was like, man, I want to continue to learn from Johnny V, learn from Russell, and stay here in New Orleans. But Johnny V told me, he asked me, what do I want to do for college? And I told him I wanted to stay in New Orleans for those reasons. And we were at the bar at Tips because there was a Sunday jazz jam session called the Young People's Jazz Forum. And the young people showing up at the time were Nicholas Payton, Jason Marsalis, and all these other guys who are professional musicians now. But Johnny put his finger in my chest on a Sunday afternoon and said, well, that's cool. You can stay here in town and go to school. But if you graduate college and you're still just around town playing little gigs and you haven't either gone on the road or moved away, I'm personally going to come find you and kick your ass. I said, all
Type
right,
of what a kind of motivation.
exactly. So I decided I was going to go on the road. So before I graduated, I started hitting the road with the New Orleans Klezmer All Stars, which has Ben Ellman in it, who is now the Galactic saxophone player.
Yeah. Was there any thought like when someone says that to you, like I mean, obviously there's a little bit of joking in it, but he's giving you good advice. Is there any and even a tiny bit where you're like, you know what, I'm gonna do whatever I want to do. I'll show you what I'm gonna do. Would you think that at all, or are you just like this person knows more than me? I'm just gonna listen.
Yeah, no, I had so much reverence for Johnny.
Hmm.
I was just like, okay, all right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go on the road or move away. And, moving away, I thought about it, but I was like, no, I really want to go on the road. That's what I want to do.
Hmm.
And I started going on the road with the Klezmer All Stars, and then started going on the road with Galactic, and I was touring with both of them. Then I had to make a choice, and I went with Galactic, and then here we are, 27 years later.
Yes. What was that? That was around what 94, 95.
So we started touring in '96.
Okay.
Robert Mercurio and Jeff Rains and I started playing together in in 1992.
Hmm.
So 30 years ago. And then in 94, we transitioned from Galactic Prophylactic to Galactic. And then we recorded a record in 95, released it, and started touring in 96.
Gotcha. Why'd you change the name? Was there any specific reason?
Well, we knew that it was a juvenile name, and we got asked to contribute a track for this compilation called Is That Jazz for Ubiquity Records out of San Francisco. And they were like, we're not putting that name on this record. And we couldn't think of another name, and the deadline was up. So they just put Galactic on the record. And we're like, oh, guess our name is Galactic now.
And where were you guys touring early on? Like all around, over the country? Were you going overseas?
So we started touring the country. We knew that we wanted to not be like just a regional band.
Mm-hmm.
So once we got our record finished, we started sending copies of it to clubs, and we would call friends of ours and say, what club should we play, right? Like, what's like a 200-person club? And we were only drawing like 50 people if we were lucky in the beginning. Sometimes less, a lot less than that. Mm-hmm. And then so we booked our first. Robert Mercurio started calling these clubs, our bass player, and we booked our first gig in Vancouver, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I think the place was called like the Chameleon Club or something. And then we filled in the trip with two gigs in Colorado. So we drove 24 hours in my parents' 1978 Econoline van, 24 hours straight, taking turns, played 2 gigs in Colorado, then drove 24 more hours to get to Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And then we spent 5 weeks coming down the West Coast.
Gotcha. And what
sometimes we would have as much as 5 days off because we couldn't get a gig in between Seattle and whatever the next place was. But we would do that, come home for a few weeks, then go on the East Coast
mm-hmm.
for a month or more, come home for a couple of weeks, then do the West Coast. So we were doing each coast 4 times a year.
Gotcha. And
so that was a 3-month cycle. West Coast, home, couple weeks, East Coast, home, couple weeks, repeat. And we would do that, for 3 months. We would do those 3-month cycles like 4 times a year for the first couple of years.
Early on, what was your take home like in terms of money in those early tours? Were you making really much at all?
No, we would all come home and I would play gigs. Some of the other guys had other jobs, like Robert was a waiter. Jeff Rains worked at a music store. Rich Vogel played on Bourbon Street. So, we were just doing different gigs when we would come home. And I remember one gig after our, second or third time playing in Vail, Colorado, being at the band condo, and Robert Mercurio handing each one of us a $5 bill. Well, guys, this is what we made tonight.
That's got to be discouraging.
Yeah, and I would buy cans of soup and a loaf of white bread, and eat soup and white bread in the back of the van. Yeah, I mean it was pretty slim in the beginning.
How long did it take before you guys were really starting to get to the point where it's like, okay, now this is a real job. I'm actually, I can go and eat real foods.
Yeah. So it took 4 years of relentless van touring for us to get to where we were then in a bus and headlining places like the Warfield
mm-hmm.
in San Francisco, which holds 2,500.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were still playing Irving Plaza, which holds about 900 or so. But we eventually worked up to Terminal 5 and played that a bunch. which holds like 2,500
Hmm.
in Manhattan.
And then
Um,
what year roughly was that?
that was like 2000,
Hmm.
and then September 11th happened, and that put a dent in attendance. People took, some people got really leery of traveling and coming out, and so that kind of curtailed attendance for a little while.
Hmm.
And then things built back up, and then and now COVID is like a whole nother world.
For
But
sure.
but now we all own homes and are putting the kids through college. Um, so but you've got to start somewhere. And my advice to people: just start. You just got to start.
Hmm.
You know, and we started calling clubs ourselves, and we started driving my parents' 1978 Ford Econoline van, same van that I went to Disney World in when I think I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, something like that.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I might have been 8 because they might have had the van for 2 years by the time that we went
Hmm. So like,
to Disney World.
how did you find reception was for Galactic's music, especially early on? Because obviously in New Orleans, it's like funk band makes perfect sense. But I guess in places like New York, LA, stuff like that. But going, other like maybe smaller towns, what was that reception like?
Yeah, it was good. What would happen was we might have 20 people at a show, right?
Hmm.
But we played like we were playing Madison Square Garden. We played like we were playing a Saturday night at Tipitina's,
Yeah.
right? So we knew what that was to have tips on a Saturday night. So we would play for 20 people like that every night. And then those people were so stoked, they would tell their friends, and then they would come back, and the next time it might be 50 people, and the next time it might be 150 people,
Hmm.
right? So it grew pretty steadily for those first 4 years. I mean, we went from playing 20 to 50 people on our first tour to 2,500 in San Francisco by the fourth year.
Hmm. Now that we're kind of a couple years out of the pandemic, like you said, the club is starting to get back on its feet. How are you? Like, how much have you been touring with Galactic since everything started to come back?
A good bit. I mean, we did 2 3-week tours, East Coast, West Coast, in February and March of
Hmm.
this year. And then we did a bunch of festivals over the summer. And then um, coming up in January, we're going to be doing 5 nights at the Blue Note in New York.
Hmm.
So we're starting to try to do things where we're playing, but not traveling every day.
Yeah.
So trying to do more multiple night stands.
Hmm.
Because, we've been doing this for 27 years.
How,
So, I want to play every day and I want to work every day. I don't necessarily want to sleep on a bus as it drives overnight to the next destination.
how do
And I
you?
don't necessarily want to travel every day. I want to play every day, but I don't necessarily want to travel every day.
For people who aren't used to doing that or maybe thinking about going on tour, how do you keep yourself fresh and how do you keep like your energy up every single night when, like you said, maybe sometimes you're not sleeping in the most comfortable places and you got early flights like that? Is it just do you just go like tunnel vision and just hope for the best, or do you have like a way that you keep your stamina up?
Yeah, I mean, I developed my systems. So when I first started touring, I couldn't sleep in the upright position very well at all. So, when you're first starting touring and you're in your 20s, everything's so new and exciting. Of course you want to go to the after party and jam and and hang out and play. And then of course, if the bar is closing, you want to go to Bob's house where we can listen to records and drink some more. And then it's like, 4, 5 in the morning, no problem. Let's go back to the hotel where we're sharing rooms, right? And then you got to be in the lobby at 8 a.m. to start driving 6 hours to the next destination. And then you're sleeping in the upright position and you're hungover and it's terrible. So, we used to do that in our 20s as kids. But then once we got into a bus, my systems started to develop into I'll do sound check, then I like to eat as soon as I can after sound check. And lately, I don't go out to eat as much anymore because it takes up time.
Mm-hmm.
So I like load up what I want to eat before sound check. And it's usually like something healthy, like salad or a poke bowl or a power bowl, something like that. And I'll find a place, and sometimes I'll order that for lunch and then eat half of it and then stick the other half in the fridge and then eat it after sound check.
Gotcha.
But I'm trying to eat more healthy. And so then do sound check, eat something, then take a nap.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah. Even if I don't fall asleep fully, it's just about like, because if you go and you go out to dinner and you're talking to people, that's just all this input and all this, mental power that you're expending. Then by the time you hit the stage, you're just toast, So I like to shut down, I get in my bunk, and so sound check, eat something, get in the bunk, and then I usually set my alarm for 45 minutes before we play. So then I'll wake up, and then I make myself an espresso, call my wife, run through a few different little warm-ups, and shed maybe on the bus with some rubber tip sticks or on a pad or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to shed during the day and practice during the day. So, by the time the gig comes up, I'm not completely cold. I've already done sound check and hopefully practiced. I'll bring a practice kit and keep it under the bus.
Gotcha.
And I'll set up backstage and practice. And that, it's great having the quiet tone heads, the silent stroke heads, and the low volume cymbals, right? It's awesome. So, and then I'll go inside and maybe try to hear the opener for a couple minutes, maybe say hi to somebody that I've put on the guest list, and then we hit the stage,
And that's why you guys have been killing it for so long, because that's how you keep your mind right, and you're able to come through, and because you don't want people who are seeing the show to be like, oh, I got the show where everyone's tired. And you obviously are never, you know what I mean? Like every show is that might be a experience that person remembers for the rest of their life. So you got to be 150% no matter what. And it's like you said, it sounds like you've been doing that since even before there was really anyone to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we're trying to play like this is going to be the last show we ever get to do, And I try to play every show like that. And I have for years, And so now my routine is, like I said, sound check, nap, then coffee, 3 chocolate covered espresso beans.
Okay.
And a little bit of warming up. So then by like in song 3 or 4, I get like this burst where like the caffeine kicks in and the adrenaline kicks in. It's just like, ah. And then,
and then you ride it until the show's over.
Yeah, I can't help but be excited, right? So I want to have that energy. And that's how I do it, though. I shut down, nap, coffee, espresso beans, hit stage.
Well, there it is. You heard it from the man himself. And Stanton, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really, really appreciate it. Before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to plug? Anything you want to tell the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's okay,
Absolutely.
I'll mention that you're doing great work on your YouTube channel, and I'm trying to get more people to come check out my YouTube channel, Stanton Moore. And right now, I I was running a sale on Stanton Drum Academy
Mhm.
over Thanksgiving weekend, right? Black Friday into Monday. So I think I'd like to offer anybody watching this, I'll offer 50% off.
Woo!
Yeah, because this is the biggest sale I've ever done. So I'm, I'm feeling in the holiday spirit. And even I realize that this will be on your YouTube channel afterwards. But if
Yeah.
people watch this far into it and it's past the sale, this code will still work, and it'll be a nice little Easter egg for making it to the end.
Hell yeah.
So the code is, when you go to check out, it's 50 for life.
Gotcha.
So if you decide to sign up for the annual subscription or the monthly subscription, for the life of your subscription, 50% off. And that's a killing deal, because
Oh
it comes
yeah.
out to like $135 or something, for a year.
Mhm.
And it's like, that's less than one lesson with me. And then in the academy, it's hours and hours and hours of video lessons. So, and they're all accompanied by written PDF lessons as well.
Mhm.
So there's a shuffle course. All the sticking stuff that I do is in there. How I develop my buzz rolls, bunch of my favorite grooves, my favorite fills. All of the Fresh Approach to Drum Set videos are in there. So there's just tons and tons of stuff. And there's a forum where people can ask me questions, and you can submit videos of yourself playing, and I'll comment on it. And so that's all the stuff that comes with if you subscribe to Stanton Drum Academy.
Amazing. And I'll put a link to that in the description so people can go check it out. Yeah, and this episode's going to be up. The replay is going to be up tomorrow night. So it'll be
Cool.
right after. Well, Stanton, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You are the man.
Thank you, Scotty.
Of course. Thank you to everyone who watched. I don't know when I'm going to be live again. Whenever someone agrees to be on the show, that's when I'll be live again. Thank you,
Yeah.
guys, and thank you, Stanton. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah.